In the year 490 BC, an army landed on a quiet beach called Marathon. But this wasn't just any army. This was the hammer of the Persian Empire. One of the largest and most sophisticated military forces the world had yet seen. A juggernaut that answered to one man, the King of Kings, Darius the Great. Their mission was brutally simple. They were to punish the city of Athens for its defiance, marched 26 miles to its gates, and bring it to heel. Standing in their way was a small army of citizen soldiers outnumbered at least 2 to 1. By all logic, they were doomed. Their city should have become just another conquest in the annals of the Persian Empire. But that's not what happened. Instead, the Athenians inflicted one of the most stunning defeats in military history. A victory so complete, it would help shape the course of Western civilization. So, how did they pull it off? How does a tiny fledgling democracy stand up to an empire? Well, the answer isn't simple. It's a story of a burning grudge of 2 completely different ways of waging war, and ultimately a tale of catastrophic Persian mistakes that were exploited by one of the most brilliant and audacious gamblers ever taken on a battlefield. This is the story of why Persia fell at Marathon. To really get why this battle even happened, we have to go back almost 10 years before. It's Marathon to a string of Greek cities in a region called Ionia, on the coast of modern-day Turkey. For about 50 years, these cities had been under Persian rule. And while the Persians were often tolerant administrators, they still ruled through local tyrants and demanded taxes and tribute. A system that never sat right with the fiercely independent Greeks. In 490 BC, that resentment finally exploded. Led by a guy named Aristogoras, the tyrant of Myotis, the Ionian cities rose up in open revolt. But Aristo was no fool. He knew he couldn't take on the Persian Empire alone, so he sailed across the Ion to mainland Greece, desperate for allies. First, he went to Sparta, the greatest military power in Greece. He rolled out a map, tempting them with the vast riches of the Persian Empire. But the Spartans were a cautious, inward-looking people. When they heard a march to the Persian capital would take 3 months, they said no. It was just too far from home. Dejected, Aristo tried his luck in Athens. He used a different tactic here. He didn't appeal to their greed, but to their family ties, reminding them that Myotis was an old Athenian colony. He was also speaking to a city buzzing with a radical new idea. Just a few years earlier, Athens had thrown out its own tyrant and created a democracy. The thought of freeing their Greek brothers from a similar fate struck a chord. Athens agreed to help, sending 20 warships joined by 5 from the city of Eretria. In 498 BC, this combined force marched on Sardis, the regional Persian capital. They caught the governor Artaphers completely by surprise, took the lower city, and in the chaos, a fire started. It accidentally burned down much of the city, including a sacred temple. For the Greeks, it was a huge symbolic win, but it didn't last. A Persian army caught them on the retreat and crushed them. The Athenians, seeing things were going south, pulled their ships out and went home, leaving the Ionians to their fate. By 494 BC, the revolt was over and Midas was destroyed. But for King Darius, this was far from over. The involvement of Athens and Eretria, and especially the torching of Sardis, was an insult he could not forgive. An attack on one of his capitals by an outside power demanded a response. The ancient historian Herodotus tells a fantastic story about Darius's rage. The king supposedly shot an arrow into the sky, asking his god to grant him revenge on the Athenians. He then ordered a servant to stand before him at every single meal and say 3 words: "Master, remember the Athenians." This wasn't just about expanding his empire anymore. This was personal. The stage was set for an invasion to make a terrifying example of the little city that had dared to poke the bear. In the summer of 490 BC, Darius's revenge fleet set sail. 600 ships commanded by Datus, a veteran admiral, and Artaphers, the king's own nephew. Their first stop was the city of Eretria, which they sacked to punish for its role in the revolt. Then they turned south and landed in a wide sweeping bay just 26 miles from Athens, the plain of Marathon. The spot was chosen for a very specific reason, on the advice of Hippias, the old exiled tyrant of Athens who is now serving the Persians. Marathon was flat and open, perfect for the Persians' ace in the hole, their cavalry. The army that came ashore was a spectacle of imperial might. While ancient numbers are often inflated, modern historians figure it was about 25,000 infantry and around 1,000 horsemen. This was a sophisticated combined arms force. Their strategy was simple. First, archers would shower the enemy with arrows to break their spirit and formation. Then, the feared Persian cavalry would charge the weakened and disorganized lines, shattering them completely. Finally, the infantry would move in to clean up the mess. The foot soldiers were a diverse bunch from all corners of the empire, armed with short spears and daggers and protected by large wicker shields. Light and mobile, but as we'll see, that would be a fatal flaw. When word of the landing hit Athens, you can imagine the panic. The city scrambled every man it could. This wasn't a professional army, but an army of citizens, farmers, potters, and merchants who were expected to defend their home. To be a hoplite, you had to buy your own gear, your panoply. We're talking a bronze breastplate, chignoirs, and that iconic Corinthian helmet that covered most of your face. Your main weapon was a 9-foot spear, called a dory, with a short sword for uplo's work. But the most important piece of gear was the shield, the aspis. It was huge, round, and made of wood, covered in bronze. A revolutionary grip system let a soldier carry its heavy weight on his forearm and shoulder. The aspis wasn't just for you. It was designed to protect the man standing next to you. This created the phalanx. Men stood shoulder to shoulder, 8 ranks deep, creating a solid wall of bronze and wood with a forest of iron spears bristling from its front. It was a human battering ram built on discipline and trust and designed for one thing: to smash into an enemy line in brutal face-to-face combat. The Athenian army had about 9,000 of these hoplites. They were joined by their only allies, the small city of Plataea, who sent every soldier they had, about 1,000 men, an act of loyalty Athens would never forget. Still, the Greeks were outnumbered at least 2 to 1, and the one army they really needed wasn't there. A runner, Phidippides, had made an incredible 150-mile, 2-day journey to Sparta to beg for help. The Spartans promised they'd come, but not yet. They were in the middle of a sacred festival where fighting was forbidden. They would march after the full moon, but that was days away. At Marathon, the Athenians were on their own. The Greek army marched to Marathon and set up a smart defensive position in the hills, blocking the roads to Athens. From there, they could look down on the massive Persian camp by the sea. For days, nothing happened. 'Twas a tense standoff and both sides were waiting, but for very different reasons. The Persian commanders Datis and Artopernes felt they had the upper hand. They controlled the open plain, perfect for their cavalry. They probably figured the Athenians would either have to attack them on that plain, a suicidal move, or just sit there while Persian agents tried to stir up rebellion inside Athens. Remember, the old tyrant Hippus was with them, and some in Athens might have welcomed him back. So the Persians could afford to wait. For the Athenians, things were much more complicated. Their command was a mess. The army was led by 10 generals, one from each of Athens's 10 tribes, plus a war archon, a civil official named Callias, who got the tie-breaking vote. According to Herodotus, the generals were split right down the middle. Half said it was crazy to fight without the Spartans and they should wait. But the other half, led by a general named Miltiades, argued fiercely for an immediate attack. Miltiades was the right man for this moment. He was an aristocrat who had actually served under the Persians before. He knew how they fought. He knew their strengths, and more importantly, he knew their weaknesses. He argued that waiting was the real danger. The longer they waited, the more likely someone would betray the city from within. In a fiery speech to Callimachus, Miltiades framed the choice perfectly. It was slavery under Persia, or a victory that could make Athens the greatest city in Cretan Greece. Callimachus was convinced he cast the deciding vote they would fight. But even then, Miltiades waited. The other generals who sided with him gave him their command days, making him the effective commander-in-chief. He was looking for the perfect moment, because he had one massive problem to solve: the Persian cavalry. The phalanx was a beast, but it was slow and vulnerable to being hit from the sides and rear. Exactly what cavalry was for. Attacking the Persian archers and cavalry on an open plain was a death sentence. Then the opportunity Miltiades was praying for arrived. For reasons historians still debate today, the Persian cavalry was gone from the battlefield. Maybe they'd been loaded back onto the ships for a surprise attack on Athens by sea. Maybe they'd been led off to find water. Whatever the reason, Miltiades' scouts brought the news. The horses were away. This was the critical Persian blunder. The one weapon that could have guaranteed their victory was gone. Miltiades knew he'd never get a better chance. As dawn broke, he gave the order to advance. Miltiades' plan was more than bold. It was downright radical. A normal Greek phalanx was the same depth all the way across, usually 8 men deep. But Miltiades knew the Persians put their best troops, the native Persians and fierce Saka warriors, in the center to counter this, and to make sure his smaller army wasn't simply wrapped around and enveloped. He stretched his line to match the Persian front, But to do that, he had to make a terrifying choice. He thinned out his center, leaving some ranks only 4 men deep. He took the men he saved and packed them onto his flanks. The right flank with himself and Camachus, and the left flank with the entire Plataean army, were now incredibly strong. It was a brilliant trap. He was offering the Persians a weak-looking center, practically inviting their elite troops to charge forward. While they did, his powerful flanks would crush the weaker Persian wings and then turn inward, smashing into the Persian center from both sides. It was a classic pincer movement, but it all depended on his thinned-out center bending without breaking. As the sun rose, the Greek line moved forward. 10,000 men, each carrying over 50 pounds of gear, began to march. Then, once they were within range of the Persian archers, Miltiades gave an order nobody expected. Charge! The entire Greek army started to run. To the Persians, this must have looked like pure insanity. Heavy infantry running for nearly a mile, with no archers or cavalry of their own. They must have thought the Athenians were a pathetic, suicidal mob. But the charge was genius. First, it meant they spent less time in the kill zone under a hail of Persian arrows. Most arrows just bounced harmlessly off their bronze armor and shields. Second, it meant they would hit the Persian line with unbelievable force, turning the battle into exactly what the Persians didn't want: a brutal hand-to-hand slugfest. The impact was devastating on the flanks. It wasn't even a contest. The heavily armored Greek wings smashed into the lightly protected Persian levies. The long Greek spears tore through wicker shields and unarmored bodies. The Persian wings broke almost immediately, running in terror back toward the ships. But in the center, just as Miltiades feared, the battle was desperate. The elite Persian and Saka infantry pushed hard, and the thin Greek center gave ground. It was pushed back, fighting a heroic, grinding retreat, bending and bending, but never breaking. For a moment, it looked like the Persians had punched right through the Greek line, and that was the decisive moment. With a level of discipline that is hard to comprehend, the victorious Greek wings didn't chase the fleeing enemies. They stopped. They turned inward, and they fell upon the exposed sides and rear of the elite Persian center that had pushed so far forward. The trap had sprung. The best of the Persian army suddenly found themselves surrounded on 3 sides. The men who thought they were winning were now being attacked from everywhere at once. Order dissolved into chaos. Being encircled is a soldier's worst nightmare. Panic took over. The Persian center broke, and the entire army was now in a full-blown rout, scrambling for their lives back to the sea. What followed was a slaughter. The Greeks chased the fleeing Persians, cutting them down by the hundreds. Many panicked and ran into the marshes on either side of the plain, where they got stuck in the mud and were butchered. The fight went all the way to the beach, where the Greeks frantically tried to capture the Persian ships. Here, the fighting was savage. One Athenian, Saint Aegeus, is said to have grabbed a Persian ship with his bare hand, only for an axe to chop it clean off. When the dust finally settled, the numbers told the story. The Greeks captured 7 ships. On the field lay the bodies of around 6,400 Persians. The Athenians lost only 192 men. The Plataeans, just 11. The Athenian dead, including the brave Commachus who cast the deciding vote, were given the ultimate honor. They were buried together in a memorial mound on the battlefield itself, heroes forever. But even with this incredible victory, the danger wasn't over. The rest of the Persian fleet wasn't sailing home. It was rounding the tip of Attica, making a mad dash for the city of Athens itself, which was now completely undefended. The Persian cavalry that had been missing from the battle was almost certainly on those ships, ready to support an attack, maybe even link up with traitors inside the city. The exhausted Greek soldiers had to perform one last miracle. Leaving a small force to guard the battlefield, the rest of the army immediately began a forced march back to Athens. After running a mile in armor, fighting a brutal battle, and chasing down an army, they now had to cover 26 miles as fast as humanly possible. They arrived just as the Persian fleet appeared off the coast. When the Persians saw the same army that had just annihilated them now lined up, ready to fight again, they knew they had lost. They hesitated for a moment, then turned their ships toward Asia. The invasion was over. Athens was safe. The Battle of Marathon was so much more than a military victory. It was a defining moment. It shattered the myth that the Persian Empire was invincible. For the first time, it proved they could be beaten, giving a jolt of confidence to all of Greece that would be crucial for the next invasion 10 years later. For Athens, the victory was a validation of their entire way of life. It proved that a state of free citizens fighting for their homes could defeat a mighty empire. The victory ignited the self-belief that would help fuel Athens's golden age. A period of art, philosophy, and culture that laid the foundations of the Western world. If you love stories of incredible underdogs, of brilliant risks, and battlefield genius, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell, because we explore tales of history's greatest gambles every single week. The memory of that day lives on in the marathon race, inspired by the legend of the messenger Phidippides. But the true legacy of Marathon isn't just a 26.2-mile run. It's the enduring idea that a small group of determined people fighting for their freedom can, with courage, discipline, and a brilliant plan, face down impossible odds and change the course of history forever.